Welcome back to the Michigan Football Network, and yet again, we are back with another mock draft, except this one is a little bit special. If you guys missed our episode yesterday, you missed the first round of this mock draft. So if you did miss that, I implore you to go check that out so you're not confused why we started at pick 33. With that said, it was a lot of fun yesterday. However, we did have some technical difficulties. Now, I am hoping and praying, fingers crossed, we got it all figured out. Test run went well, so we shouldn't have any issues today. So bear with us as we kind of, deal with these technical difficulties. But with that being said, without further ado, the New York Jets are on the clock. And, as the GM of the Jets, which I was for this, simulation or whatever you want to call it. We have a lot of needs, a lot of needs. So this time I went with a little more sexy pick, I guess if you want to call it that. Makai Lemon, the wide receiver from USC, is going to start us off in the second round. I'm a big fan of him. I'm sorry, I am an idiot. Not Makai Lemon. I picked him in the first round. CJ Allen, the linebacker from Georgia,
Hell of a
is the
pick here.
33rd pick. Yeah, I was confused because they had two first round picks. So I just read the second player without actually looking at the pick. So bear with me. Not a technical difficulty, just a mental one on that. So with that said, though, CJ Allen, the
Been there,
linebacker,
man.
the linebacker from Georgia, obviously just ran a 4.4 at his pro day. So, he's probably going to shoot up a little bit on draft boards. But this, is a great landing spot for him, and I think for the Jets, we need some linebacker help. And as this, mock draft goes on, there could be some changes with the Jets linebacker room outside of this. So stay tuned. But I love C.J. Allen, the player. I think he fits what the Jets are looking for, and adding him to a defense, that they just added Arvell Reese as well. I really love the value here. And obviously, linebacker isn't a great, value selection or whatever you want to call it, but best player on the board that fits a need, I think. So CJ Allen from Georgia starts us off at pick 33. And then if open it up to either of you guys if you have any comments on that pick.
Yeah, like you said, a lot
I
of
like
needs there with the Jets, especially. So it's like you can't go wrong as long as you get quality players. And I feel like a Georgia linebacker, you're getting a quality player there.
Yeah, for sure.
I like him much more as an off-the-ball linebacker. I saw a couple people saying he might end up putting his hand in the dirt, kind of like that Michael Parsons conversion to an edge thing, and I think that's ridiculous in my opinion. But as an off-ball linebacker, I like him a lot.
Yeah, and I agree there. I really don't see him as an edge rusher. I mean, maybe in like, just to use his athleticism and versatility, maybe a little bit, but
Well,
that
I,
is
I can see
definitely
him
not what I
blitzing from
drafted him
time to
for.
time, but that's about
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, a blitz for sure. And with that, let me go ahead and select him before we move on. With that, I am back on the clock with the Arizona Cardinals. And we went Ruben Bain in the first round to kind of shore up that edge position. And we're going to stay in the trenches. I think a team like Arizona has a ton of needs. And, I think the trenches is where you begin building a team, at least the right way, in my opinion. So we go Chase Besantis, the guard from Texas A&M. I think him and Emmanuel Pregnon are like neck and neck for me. So I really, really like the value here at 34. I know Pregnon went a little bit earlier, but maybe 10 picks ago in the first round. So yeah, 31st. So not even that many picks, about 4 picks away. So that's really good value, I think, and a really good player that fits a good need. And then James, if you have any comments on that, we can have you go first on this one.
I love O-linemen, as you know, but in terms of like Vega or Pregnon, I do like them significantly more, but this is not a bad pick in my opinion at all. I think he is the consensus number three interior lineman. I just think those two other ones are just a tier above. But obviously they're taken, so it obviously makes sense.
Yeah, and with that, honestly, I think you'd be surprised how many people actually have Besantis over Pregnon. There are quite a few in
I've
the
seen a couple,
community
I
that
just
have it. So, and I
disagree.
don't necessarily have that. I will say I think I like Pregnon a little bit more, which makes sense. He went a little bit earlier, but yeah. With that, Ryan, do you have anything to add here before we move on?
Yeah, I've seen a decent amount of that as well, with Basantis being ranked above. Obviously, Pregnon's on the older side, and we're already seeing a trend here that we've got three guys that like to build from the inside. So I think that might happen throughout the draft here, where we get guys that might slot a little ahead of maybe where they are in mock drafts, because we got three guys that believe building the offensive line is the way to build a team. So obviously, we all agree with each other, but it may lead to some position disparity here.
Yeah, that's for sure. I will say, as this mock went on, seeing some of the guys available a little later was kind of surprising, but I think it's because, like you mentioned, we kind of all value the positions the same. So good players available, just not at a position that we necessarily value that high. So with that, the Tennessee Titans are now on the clock with the 35th overall selection.
I was gonna say, as we both value the trenches, watch the first two rounds just be 64 linemen, and then we just go on from there. But no, I'm gonna buck the trend actually with this very pick. And you guys get to laugh at how I pronounce this because I have no clue. But with the Titans taking Love in the first round, as I was mentioning yesterday, in case you didn't catch it, I'll briefly touch on it. They need to get Cam Ward some weapons, and already adding, in my opinion, the best running, well, most people's opinion, the best running back in this draft. We're going to add the best receiver available in Texas A&M's Kevin Concepcion. Hopefully that's close enough. But we're going to go ahead and add him and give Cam Ward, in addition to Love, yet another weapon on that offense, allowing him to try to get that ball out a little quicker.
Yeah, and your pronunciation was pretty on point, Kevin Concepcion. And with that, I do love the pick here. Tennessee needs some receiver help. The only question mark I have, and I'm not saying it's a bad pick, but I just wonder how he's going to fit in next to Wan'Dale Robinson in that offense. Like, how will they use those two guys? Because they're so similar.
They're similar,
But I
absolutely.
love the value, though. I mean, Concepcion, a lot of people see him as a first-round pick. Getting him at 35 obviously is a good pick. I just would be curious to see them actually, on field together, because both of them are kind of slot guys, but both can play
Absolutely.
outside. So
I'll say I totally get the I'll say potential hesitation just because they are very similar players. But in my opinion, they're both good players, and I don't think you can have, especially no offense to Tennessee Titan fans, but you guys know you watch the team more than anyone. You need more good players. So even
yeah,
if they are the similar style, you at least add another solid player.
yeah, and I like I said, I think they both can offer similar things, but can kind of do a little bit of everything. So I think it would be fun to have them both. But with that, Ryan, do you have anything to add here before we move on?
No, I think you guys kind of hit it on the head. I mean, it's a good value there. And when you're the Titans, you want to kind of take the best value. You have a decent amount of needs. I think they'll figure out the fit on the field. And he wrote a great article for the Players Tribune that people may want to check out. We are not referring to the thing that he refers to in the article. I'm doing this intentionally to not refer to it. But he writes an article about it, and it's an interesting article. It made me like him even more, and I read it after we had already gotten to that part of the draft.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and not to spend too much time on it, but I love the article that he wrote, and like you said, I agree. I think it made me like him a little bit more as well. With that, the Las Vegas Raiders are now on the clock with the 36th overall selection.
Well, the listeners don't know this, but James was making fun of me for my IU hat. He's making fun of me for being a homer, which is fair enough. But I did draft Fernando in the first round. I mean, that's a lock. Any of us would have taken him if we had Vegas. I would like to point out that I could have taken a corner here from IU, but instead I went with Colton Hood. Thinking that was a good fit here for Vegas. They're a team with a decent amount of needs. That they're kind of an interesting situation to me, because obviously there was a lot made out of the Crosby trade and the Ravens nixing it, but it does put the Raiders in kind of a precarious position here, because basically they made a move, thought they had cleared that cap hit, and then got the cap hit back. So I think this draft is going to be extra important for them. And thankfully, they now have what is one of the most advantageous things in the NFL, which is a rookie QB, a QB on a rookie deal. That's going to factor into their future, but they're going to need to nail the rest of this draft too, because they're a little bit they're in rough shape because they've got a damaged asset that they didn't think was going to be on their books for that number here.
Yeah, and with everything said, I personally love Colton Hood. I think he is a first round pick. And I literally was just looking at his name like, man, I can't believe he's still on the board. And then he goes the next pick. So, I think we were obviously thinking very similar there, but I love the fit. The Raiders, like we mentioned with a lot of teams, they need a lot of things. And I think you get the best player on the board, period, at a position of need too. So really good pick there. And then James, you got anything to add there before we move on?
Just peer pressure works. I made him take Colton Hurd over Bonds. So,
Which I think's a better pick. So I think you
for
helped
what
him
the
out
Raiders
there.
need, I agree.
Yeah. I love Pons, but I do think he is going to have some issues at the next level. And when you have a guy like Colton Hood sitting there, it's hard to pass on him. And I think, honestly, Pons is good, but I am a little lower on him, I think, than a lot of other people. So,
I saw two mocks today at lunch on my lunch break at work that had the Lions taking Ponds in round 2.
yeah, I don't know about that one. The 50th pick, I think, is right around the value we'll see for him. I just don't know if the Lions will do that, just because we have bigger needs, and I think we can get a corner in the 4th or 5th round. That'll help us with depth. So, with that though, the Giants are now on the clock with the 37th overall pick.
Yeah, so obviously first round was a little bit eventful for the Giants. Got Styles and then had to fill in for the trade that they made for Lawrence. So then ended up taking Peter Woods there. Decided to kind of double up on what became a position of need the way the board broke, going Caleb Banks here from Florida. Because it's probably the one situation in which you can maybe make your line better after trading Lawrence, but you've got to do that through 2 players. You can't do that through one. But yeah, if you're replacing Lawrence and who was lining up next to him with now Banks and Woods, maybe that's not better from day one, but day fill in the blank, it's probably got a good chance of being an improvement over their current situation, especially with the ends. And then you got Styles behind them. I figured that obviously we know this well. I don't think it's said enough that the defensive tackles make life easier for the linebacker. So the 3 now we've improved kind of that interior pass rush that we referred to in the last episode with the first round here.
Yeah, and I think this is best case scenario for the Giants after trading Lawrence. I mean, you get a guy like Peter Woods late in the first who was a consensus top 10 pick preseason, and then you get another guy like Caleb Banks who is just a behemoth of a man, a great athlete. Obviously, he's got some injury issues, but if he's healthy, man, that defensive line is now legitimately scary. And then you add Sonny Styles to that linebacker room, and it's like, okay, they might be cooking with some grease over here in New York. And I think Harbaugh, if he was watching this, would be clapping his hands like, please and thank you, I will take that. With that, James, do you have anything to add here before we go?
Just about the cherry on top, because you guys basically covered it. But between Woods, Banks, last year they took Abdul Carter. For now, I know there's some trade rumors around them, but they still have Thibodeau. And then obviously they have Brian Burns. And once again, so that's a scary D line and mostly cheap because almost all of those guys are on their rookie contracts. And then as you mentioned, you had Sonny Styles, who's the consensus #1 linebacker in this draft. Yeah, and as you kind of mentioned earlier, we love building in the trenches, and that is a pretty sick and youthful trench.
Yeah, that is for sure a great way to fill in what they lost with Dexter Lawrence. With that being said, the Houston Texans are now on the clock with the 38th pick, the team who traded for Dexter Lawrence with the 28th overall pick. Now, obviously, we got Dexter Lawrence. Okay, so I'm essentially thinking we drafted Dexter Lawrence with the 28th overall pick. I am happy with that. With our next pick, though, we're going to go on the other side of the ball, and we're going to take Chris Bell, the wide receiver from Louisville. Now, a lot of people might be thinking, oh, this is a little early, X, Y, and Z. I personally love Chris Bell. I think he could be now, you might get mad at me when I say this. He could be an AJ Brown type receiver in the NFL. Do I think he's going to be as good? Probably not. But I mean, remember AJ Brown wasn't a very high pick either. So I think that archetype we've seen with like Xavier Legette not work out. I think Chris Bell has some things Legette didn't though coming out. So I think adding him to this wide receiver room. Obviously, Tank Dell is going to be injured entering the season, and we traded, another receiver, Xavier Hutchinson, over to the Giants to get Lawrence. I think adding him gives us another really talented player and will help CJ Stroud in the long run because he has had some issues. So with that, Ryan, you got anything to add there?
Yeah, I like the pick. I think it's interesting to watch the Giants and Texans kind of mirror against each other because the Giants are now building into the youth. The Texans are kind of going the reverse. They're pooling their assets and they're saying, okay, we took Lawrence, we improved our tackle position there and consolidated assets there. They give up Hutchinson, but then they get somebody that would rank above them on the depth chart anyways in Bell. And I like that you went with your guy in that kind of group of receivers because after the guys that have already been taken, now there's the next batch is kind of like, okay, you got to go with the guy that you think is going to fit your team best because to your point, it's not really a reach considering the next batch that's kind of on the board right now.
Yeah, and that's exactly my line of thinking. As the Houston GM, I'm going, okay, we only got Stroud on a rookie deal for a year or two more. Let's try to load up and win while we can. And then, personally, I'm not out on Stroud, but I'm not 100% he's going to get a second contract for, $50 million per year from Houston. So we're kind of giving him as much as we can there, and then we're going to see what happens. But with that, James, you got anything to add?
I don't, to be honest. I don't know too much about him.
And that's valid. With that, the Cleveland Browns are now on the clock.
I am so happy I have Cleveland for this pick, and I think that might be the first time even a Cleveland GM said that. So, with this pick, I am going to, I'll just say piss off a subsection of fans, but I've never cared about that, and so why would I start now? I am going to take Ty Simpson, quarterback from Alabama. When you don't have a quarterback, you need one, and despite the cult of Shadur Sanders fans, he's not a good quarterback. And Deshaun Watson is a shell of what he used to be. I know a lot of the reports I've been seeing this offseason are Watson's the favorite to get the starting gig. I think that's just purely financial based. But obviously, he had some great time in Houston as a player. But player wise, never transitioned after the trade. I'm not a believer in Shadur Sanders. I'm not a believer in. I'm spacing on the guy they got from Oregon last year.
Dylan Gabriel.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dylan Gabriel. I'm like, if it was in the season, I'd remember. But I'm like, they drafted two guys late that, in my opinion, aren't difference makers. I don't know if Ty Simpson is going to be like the guy, but a lot of other people are higher on him than I am personally. But when you can get, in my opinion, the consensus number 2 quarterback in this draft in round 2, you got to at least take the flyer on the guy. Because if you hit on a rookie quarterback, your next, in this case 4, because it is the second round, you don't get that 5th year option. But your next 4 years are much easier.
Yeah, and I think this is great value getting the second best quarterback in the draft here at pick 39. Now you kind of have a logjam at quarterback for the Browns, which is something I don't think we've really said before.
They'd still only have one good one.
True. That's true. But considering, Deshaun Watson has to be on the roster money-wise. Gabriel has to be on the roster money-wise. Shador doesn't necessarily have to be, but it would be tough, I think, for them to cut them. So they will
I
have
would practice squad him at best. But that's just
really
me.
Okay. I mean, personally, I might disagree with you there. I do like
that's fine.
Shador a little bit more than that. I think he I don't think earned the starting spot by any means, but earned a look at least. But I get the value here. I mean, a 39th overall pick, taking the second best quarterback, you definitely can't be mad at it as a team that needs one. But, I've kind of had this conversation before with the quarterback class this year. If I'm a QB needy team, I don't even look at quarterback outside of Mendoza personally until the third
That
round.
makes sense.
And that's only because how good the 27 class is. You know what I mean? That's the only reason, really, as the Jets GM, I would say, I don't know if I would even look at Ty with the 33rd pick. But also, I think, at 39, it's a little different. So with that, Ryan, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, Cleveland's going with the Pokemon approach to quarterback. They're trying to catch them all
Yeah.
here. Yeah. So I think that's on brand for what they were, because that was, you mentioned the ones that they acquired last year in the draft, but they had Pickett in the mix for a while. They had Flacco. It was like, are you just going to go with an all QB lineup and all throw it to each
Right.
other, or what are you going to do? But I can see both sides of this. I'm probably in Jace's camp with Shedeur, thinking he should be on the roster. One, because you got to see what the development can be, because you just took him last year. Two, he's a moneymaker for them. He's gonna
No doubt about that.
sell. Yeah, so there's that element to it that I'm sure a Cleveland franchise that's struggling a little bit to make money, other than being an NFL team, that's probably a good fit. But yeah, I like the idea of taking a guy that can be a developmental quarterback for him and has a lot of potential in the second round here.
And like you said, James, if he hits, this is great value. So with that, the Chiefs are now on the clock with the 40th overall pick.
Okay, well, so James may have bullied me for a little while, but it didn't last. It didn't last very long because the Chiefs also have a need at corner. There's a couple good ones on the board. Jace is showing them right now. You got Chris Johnson. You got Sis out of South Carolina. Abney's not bad either. Scott. This whole board is good, but I may have leaned into the guy that I've seen the most, which is D'Angelo Ponds. I am higher on him seemingly than what Jace is talking about. I do think he'd be a great fit for the Lions at 50. I don't think they should necessarily go corner, but as far as their team needs, he's like a kind of a younger, probably more skillsier version of Amik Robertson to me. So if they like that, this is kind of a good fit. But yeah, you got to be okay with the height. That's going to be an issue. He's a movable piece, but the Chiefs have been kind of progressively shedding some defensive backfield pieces over the last 2 or 3 years here, obviously with McDuffie most recently. So they need some help in the secondary, and I decided to start with Ponds because I think he's got the swagger that would work well on that team as well.
Yeah, and I definitely like Ponds as a player. I mean, like I mentioned before, I do like a couple other guys more, but I do understand Kansas City going this route. And like you said, I think he would fit the Lions great if he was there in the third round for us, because our two needs are so obvious that it would be hard to pass on, especially not having a third round pick. But with that, James, you got anything to add here?
I love Ponds as much as I give Ryan crap for Indiana. I feel like it's as it was touched on. I feel like it's massively a height thing. I feel like if Ponds was like 6'1", he could be a top 20 pick. Like he is tremendously skilled, and while height is a factor, he is very sticky. And I mean, I'm not going to act like there's no one 6'3", 6'4", in college. Like he can cover still some bigger guys. It obviously gives him a different um, challenge, but he will stay step for step with anyone. And I noticed on, especially on Stick to the Model here, it has him as a nickel. So going against those shifty slot guys, I feel like he can be an absolute lockdown guy. So while you mentioned, I don't know quite how he fits or how he fits for the Lions at 50 with the other holes we have. But when I saw his name on the mocks I looked at earlier, I did kind of smile like, okay, I get it. But yeah, I'm like, I do think the first two picks have to be O-line, D-line. So um, I would be a little, I guess, somewhat aggravated just because we need trench guys so bad. But I can't lie. If his name gets called at 50 for the Lions, I won't be upset.
Yeah, and I definitely agree there. And I also think a lot of more teams are going to more of a nickel base anyway. So nickel corners are being a little bit more valued in the NFL today. But the Cincinnati Bengals are now on the clock with the 41st overall pick.
Yeah, this was an interesting team to me to take over because obviously they're known for their dynamic offense. They have Burrow, they have the receiving trio there, or duo, and then slash hoping to add to it and have a couple complementary guys. But they obviously need a decent amount, especially on defense. So they got Delane in the first round. I wanted to go. I wanted to add to their linebacker room and go with Jacob Rodriguez, because another guy that maybe some of the things we said about Pons could kind of apply. He's a fiery player, but he's a little undersized. People are worried about the size, but I think he'll be able to overcome that. And I think that's kind of an alpha guy that they can put in their defense and improve the other guys around them from day one, because they're going to need to build things out here, as you'll see as the draft goes on with them. Because once I looked at some of the teams had less needs than I thought, and then I looked at this team and I was going, yeah, they really got a decent amount of holes to fill for a team that people thought was going to factor into the playoff chase before Burrow went down.
Yeah, and I think losing Logan Wilson and Jermaine Pratt last year, and obviously their defense not being great. Rodriguez here is a great value pick, and I think Rodriguez is one of the more polarizing players in this class, similar to Pons, like you mentioned. He could go as early as like 20 something. He could go as late as the third round, and we really won't know until it happens, because draft people are all over the place with him, and I assume the NFL values it the same. So, but James, you got anything to add there before we move on?
No, I like him. He's a hell of a player, and he's another guy that, not to make everything Lions related, but he's another guy I have seen from time to time go to the Lions in the second round, because I do think if you're not going trenches, our biggest other need is linebacker with Anzalone leaving. So I think it's a great pick for Cincinnati, and he's a great player, and that's one less player on the board for the Lions when we pick at 50, if we pick at 50.
With that, too, I saw someone pick him at 17 recently in a mock draft, which I
Oh,
was
that's
like,
too early.
whoa. I was like, that's
I like him.
crazy.
I don't like him like that.
Yeah, that's nuts considering our needs and his value. But with that, the Saints are now on the clock with the 42nd overall pick.
I went a very similar way as the Bengals. I feel like, at least team building wise, I wanted to build the Saints kind of like the Titans, because not trying to really crap on the team or the fans or anything like that, but you guys need a lot of help in a lot of areas. So with Rodriguez gone, because he was one of the guys I was looking at this pick, I just went with the next best linebacker, Anthony Hill Jr. from Texas. In my opinion, he's the next best linebacker, or I should say the best that's remaining on the board. I feel like he has at least I cannot talk. Elite athleticism. He has good range sideline to sideline, and he just happens to find the ball wherever it is, and he can kind of be that. Kind of that Campbell for the Lions defense, kind of be that quarterback of the defense and let you build your defense around him, especially with them going with a pass rusher in the first round. Adding Anthony Hill in the second round just really solidifies that defensive end or defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and missing or losing Demario Davis this offseason probably lends to that as well. And their linebacker core wasn't great before that. So, Ryan, you got anything to add here?
Yeah, I was going to, James, answer the question that I was going to ask him, which is if Rodriguez was on the board, would that be in consideration? But
Absolutely.
the linebackers are interesting to me. They're kind of like the tackles this year, where there's kind of an odd combination of them, and they all have different skill sets. So I think it's going to be interesting to see which teams are kind of interested in which linebackers, because there's kind of an elite group and then a little bit of a drop off, but you got guys that are kind of that have differing skill sets, especially for linebacker, where you need a lot of the same skill set. So it reminds me of the conversation we had about tackle yesterday, talking about the idea that there's a lot of different traits among those tackles. Linebacker was kind of that position in the defense for me.
Yeah, and I would totally agree there. Miami is now on the clock with the 43rd overall pick. And we went, Jermod McCoy and then Denzel Boston with our two first-round picks. Corner and receiver are two sexy positions. So I went with a not-so-sexy position here in the second round, and I went with Keelan Rutledge, the interior lineman out of Georgia Tech. Now, obviously he's going to play guard for us. But I do really like Rutledge, and I really like him in this system that we're going to run here in Miami. And I also feel like he brings that kind of nasty streak that I want to add to the interior of this offensive line. So Keelan Rutledge at 43, I think is good value, and obviously is a fit and shores up a need. So James, you got anything to add there?
My only comment on him is because I do like him. Is I thought you said it wasn't a sexy position. We love the trenches here, man. I
Very
know
true.
outside of this podcast, yeah, there will be the dominating opinion a guard's not a sexy pick, but I'm like I've been pounding the table for Vega, who's a guard, so I mean I'm all for it.
Yeah, and I definitely agree there. I personally find interior offensive linemen very sexy, but that's just me. But with that, Ryan, you got anything to add here?
Hey, everybody's got their thing, so that's how it goes. But no, it is funny to watch because obviously on the left there you've got the position expected position that they're being taken. I would watch the trend of the offensive linemen, especially on the interior, because now we're at number 66. Yet we've got 33 still on the board and some others. So I think it's going to continue to trend that way. But I mean, we're all in agreement, like you said. It's a way to build a team. So then you're going to have the effect that maybe some of the other teams will then kind of rush to the podium and say, well, if this is a position of need for everybody, and now there's a lack of supply, I'm going to have to go get mine.
Yeah, and I definitely agree there, and I think that's kind of the thought process I had right here was like, okay, I think there's some positions I can get a little later because they're a little bit deeper, but here I just had to go with Rutledge. But with that, the Jets are now on the clock with the 44th pick, and we kind of went the opposite way. We went Arvell Reese at 2, Makai Lemon at 16, and then C.J. Allen, the linebacker, at 33. Here we are going to go Chris Johnson, the corner out of San Diego State. One of my not necessarily my guys in this draft, but a guy I really, really like. Good athlete, very technically sound. And I think he fits what we're going to want with the Jets, being able to, play good man coverage and things like that. So, not to say he's going to be a one-to-one replacement of Sauce Gardner. I do think we get a positional replacement here at least. And then, James, do you got anything to add there?
No, I was to be honest just marveling because I did not notice. I mean, maybe it's just because Jets aren't my team for this exercise. I did not realize that the Jets have 4 picks in the top 44 selections. So like I knew they had extra picks from trading Sauce. I knew they had extra picks from trading Quentin Williams, but I did not look at the totality of it. So wow, just that's what caught my attention. But as you mentioned, I do like Chris Johnson, and as you, I mean, just repeating what you say at this point, but let's get it over with. You got to replace Sauce Gardner, so I mean, put a corner in there who I don't quite want to say is a similar skill set because obviously Sauce went fifth overall or whatever it was and got traded for another first, but he fits the whole. I feel like he will do at least a second round picks job. Obviously, I feel like corner might be the hardest position for rookies other than quarterback. Everything you do is reactive, so you just gotta let the receiver do what he does first and then react to it. So I would not expect huge things from any corner, unless actually this year maybe not. But all in all, sorry, I'll wrap this up. Good pick.
No
Sorry, I
worries.
was just circling there. It's my bad.
We have all been there. Ryan, with that, you got anything to add?
Well, just that, I'm the guy that took the last 2 corners over Johnson, but I think he's a strong pick as well. That's a strong position, stronger than I would have thought before kind of evaluating all of the talent. I think there's going to be a bit of a run like we had with corners because there's some depth there, as you referenced earlier, Jace, that the Lions may go after later.
Yeah, for sure. And with that, the Baltimore Ravens are on the clock with the 45th overall pick.
I am thrilled to have the Ravens, and I would be thrilled if I was a Ravens fan. After getting one of my favorite players in the entire draft, Vega, the left guard from Penn State in the first round, I get, in my opinion, a late first round defensive end here, and I will take Cassius Howell from Texas A&M. Between getting Trey Hendrickson in free agency, and they attempted to trade for Max Crosby. Obviously, we all know how that worked out with it being taken back. They clearly wanted to pair Trey Hendrickson up with another pass rusher, and I know they got Mike Green last year in the second round. But Cassius Howell, I feel like, is not quite that every down defensive end. I feel like he's much more of a pass rush specialist. But with that being said, adding him into the same defensive end room with Mike Green, I feel like they can complement each other and rotate in and out, keeping each other fresh. And as we've mentioned countless times, we like building in the trenches. So I will just take him and really enjoy my two first picks if I'm a Baltimore fan.
Yeah, I've talked about Cassius Howell a few times on this show. I like him. I don't love him. My issue with this pick, and it's not a big one, is just like who is going to stop the run off the edge for the Baltimore Ravens next year? Because
Who runs the ball?
Mike Green is not a good run stopper. Cassius Howell, I think his rookie year, he's not going to be on the field on first down ever. That's how poor of a run defender I think he is. However, his pass rush ability is really, really good. And that obviously is why I'm assuming you took him. You didn't take him for his run stopping ability. So I just would be
Not at 45
curious.
now.
Right. I just would be curious, like, how is their run defense going to look next season? But again, good pick and good pass rusher. Ryan, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I'm kind of, I can see both perspectives here because you do need kind of that heavy edge that the Lions prefer to complement this. But I do like, there's some teams that more go with a rotation of guys, and they say, hey, we want warm bodies that we can rotate in, and that's how we'll apply our pressure. And I think the Ravens have fit in that category at some point. So I think that's what James is going for here. But yeah, decent value for the pick for sure too.
Yeah, and I think if Cassius Howell can become at least a decent run defender, you got a pretty damn good edge rusher there. So I definitely understand the thought process. Get after that quarterback. With that, the Bucks are now on the pick or on the clock with the 46th overall pick.
So obviously something I've been highlighting here throughout the draft that, we're seeing some of those offensive linemen leave, and Tampa's a team that could use some help on their offensive line. And although there's probably some other directions they could go here, realizing that may be a position that isn't quite as deep and one that may not be available as well later. I went with Ginnings Dunker of Iowa, guy that can, I know some people are calling him a tackle, some people are calling a guard. I'll defer to Jace on this one, but I assume he's going to have Matt guard. But a guy that could likely play multiple positions. Tampa tends to prefer that. They got Cody Mock, who was a guy that basically profiled as he could play anywhere outside or inside initially, that people kind of couldn't put their finger on him either. So I look at this as another tradable piece in the offensive line, reinforcing and not making Baker run around quite as much, even though he seems to like to do that.
Yeah, and I would have him at guard. However, I do think he can play tackle. But I really like this pick. As we've mentioned, build through the trenches, and the Bucks definitely need some help there. James, you got anything to add there?
No, I really like Dunker. I think he's another, I'll just say dark horse candidate if the Lions wanted to go D-line round one and O-line round two and switch it up a little bit because of his versatility. I know he hasn't played center, but I know at the combine he said he has taken some center reps of his own just because he is willing to play anywhere on the O-line. He is a perfect Dan Campbell like attitude grit guy, and he's probably got one of the sickest hairdos. And if you know what he looks like, you know what I mean. In the draft, um, and yeah, I really like the pick. I feel like it's also a really good fit for Tampa too. Not for
Yeah,
Tampa too, but Tampa as well.
right. And I definitely agree there. Before we move on, we have some breaking news here on the show. Another trade has went through. The first trade obviously was Dexter Lawrence to the Texans for the 28th pick and Xavier Hutchinson between myself and Ryan. The second trade will also be between myself and Ryan. I'm sorry, the second trade will be between myself and James, as he is the Cowboys GM. Here we have, and this is a little bit of a smaller trade, nothing quite as big as Dexter Lawrence to Houston. Don't get me wrong, we're aware of that, but
Sorry, not
we
everything can be a
have
blockbuster.
right. And bear with me here, because I think it's a pretty good trade for both sides, but obviously not a blockbuster. But the Colts get Terrence Steele, the offensive tackle. We need right tackle, as Braden Smith actually signed with the Texans, of all people, this offseason. We desperately need some tackle help, and the Cowboys needed to get off some of that contract money that they gave to Steele. So we take on Terrence Steele in his contract, and we get our starting right tackle. Not the greatest starting right tackle, don't get me wrong, but we get one, and the 112th overall pick in the fourth round for Kenny Moore, the corner, slot corner, which obviously requested a trade last week. So it felt like, yeah, this might not be the greatest value for him, but with him requesting a trade and everything like that, we had to get this done. And the reason we did it now is because there is someone on the board we really like, but we didn't want to necessarily pull the trigger without knowing what we would get for more. So with that trade being done, the Indianapolis Colts are going to go with defensive back Keontae Scott from Miami. Now, it might be a little early for Scott for some people. However, he is one of my guys in this draft. I love Keontae Scott. I love his versatility. He can play safety. He can play corner. He can play slot. And I think the Colts desperately need some help in that back end, whether it be slot or corner or safety. And obviously, like I said, he adds kind of all of that for us. A physical guy will definitely come down and make plays in the run, and obviously can cover. So I really like the pick here at 47. And with that, James, do you have anything to add about the trade or the pick?
No, you covered it pretty well. I needed some corner help with, in addition to getting rid of some salary cap, and with me taking Monroe Freeling, I already kind of have a replacement tackle already on the roster.
Yeah, totally. Ryan, anything to add there?
Yeah, I'm with you on this one, Jace. I mean, I know he's on the stick to the model board at 61. This might be. I think he's underrated, even going at 47. He might be one of the more underrated players in the draft currently. I'm real curious to see where he actually goes, because that positional versatility. And I said this to James earlier before we went live, but obviously I got the IU hat. I think some of the IU guys are underrated, but I also think there's some Miami guys that are underrated for being the final two teams. And Keontae Scott's at the top of that list for Miami for me.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. It's kind of weird how both the teams that were in the national championship seem to have their players undervalued, whereas you have Clemson, who was terrible. They're going to have a bunch of guys drafted early. So, kind of a weird thing that happened there in college football this season. But with that, the Falcons are now on the clock with the 48th overall pick, and I am the Falcons GM. And unfortunately, we don't have a first round pick because the guy before me, I don't know what he was thinking, but he traded our first round pick for a guy who won't play football probably ever again. So, with that, we basically took a first round pick and put it in the garbage. With that being said, though, we are going to go with a defensive player here, Jake Golday, the linebacker from Cincinnati. Obviously, the best linebacker on the board right now, and I like what he can add to this Falcons team. Obviously, we need linebacker pretty badly. We have other needs as well, but I felt like here, the value with what we need, I think just made a lot of sense. So we go ahead and take Jake Golday from Cincinnati. James, you got anything to add on that one?
No, he's the last linebacker that I like truly, truly like. Before, in my opinion, the linebacker tier kind of falls off. So I do think that is a very good pick, especially with your needs and the first round pick that I guess we're keeping nameless, but with him no longer, probably no longer being there. Yeah, I like that pick a lot. Very necessary and is a very solid player.
And I will say I like Josiah Trotter and Kyle Lewis quite a bit still, but I do think after them, I mean, if you even just stick to the model, agrees. Kyle Lewis is ranked 69th, and then the next linebacker is 118th. So obviously, this is the time to get your linebacker if you need a starter. And with that, I'm sorry, Ryan, do you have anything to add there?
Oh no, it's fine. But I was just going to echo what you guys were saying about because the linebacker is similar to tackle, like I said earlier, where you've got a lot up front, then a little bit of a hole, and then a lot on the back end. I think if you can wait, there's some
Mhm.
good value there. But yeah, that middle ground you want to get before you get to that middle ground, or wait till afterwards, because taking one in the mid rounds probably isn't the best there. But yeah, I think he's in that kind of upper tier for sure.
Yeah, and I definitely agree there. I think once you get to like late third round, early fourth round, the linebacker tier completely drops, and then it picks back up, like you said, around like the sixth round, where you can get some really good value. So I definitely agree there. With that, Minnesota is now on the clock with the 49th overall pick.
Yeah, Minnesota, I had taking Dylan Thieneman in the first round, shoring up that safety spot. I want to continue to build their defense and up the middle. We lost both starting defensive tackles in free agency this offseason, so I am going to go ahead and take the best one on the board, which is Christian Miller. He is not much of a pocket pusher kind of guy, but he is, in my opinion, elite against the run, especially up the middle. And with the next team on the board and division rival Lions, obviously adding to their O line with Cade Mays is kind of goes to a throw for throw counter kind of build.
Yeah, and I definitely agree there. Defensive tackle is a huge need after getting rid of both of the starters from last season. And Christian Miller is a great player. Ryan, you got anything to add there?
I just want to clip what James said there, because we're going to be able to repeat that about the defensive tackle position, I think, a lot of times in this draft, because there's a lot of guys that are kind of those heavy middle, take up a lot of space, but not necessarily the pocket pushers here at this point.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. And with that, the Lions are now on the clock with the 50th overall selection. And we're going to take a little bit more time on this one just because this is a Detroit Lions centered show. With that, though, I am the GM. I'm acting as the GM of the Lions. And it's funny, Ryan mentioned on the show yesterday, which if you weren't there for it, check it out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all those things. Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh. And with that being said, you know, the defensive line, or I'm sorry, to finish my point there, it was just a coincidence that I got the Lions. I promise I didn't, there was no insider trading. I didn't cheat. I actually decided, I said, you know what? I gave myself the Lions last time. Let's be fair. And I somehow ended up with them anyway. So,
I was about to say, I'm glad you said you got him last year. I'm like, it just so happens the same as last year, eh?
yeah. Well, last year I did it on purpose. Okay, so I will say last year I gave myself the Lions on purpose. This time it just happened. But with that, there are a lot of good players left that the Lions could look at. Zion Young, Brandon Cisse, Malachi Lawrence. I don't know about R. Mason Thomas. He's really not our style. But there's a few other guys too that are available here that would make sense. However, I went with Gabe Akas. Okay, and there's a few reasons why. Obviously, I love the player. That's number one. Number two is I think he just fits what we want right now a little bit more than a Zion Young or a Malachi Lawrence, even though I like those players just as much. Zion Young, in my opinion, just does not offer the pass rush right now that Akis does. He's a little bit better of a run defender, and he's got a little bit more size to him, 6'6", 260. However, I think Akis is more pro ready right now today, and is more of what we look for across from Hutch. And then Malachi Lawrence is the other one I'll mention because I really, really love Malachi Lawrence, but he's more of a pass rusher only. He's an okay run defender, but I just think what the Lions look for, they would rather go with Akis because he's kind of the in-between, in my opinion. A good pass rusher, a good run defender. Do I think he's really elite at either? No, but it's also the 50th overall pick, so it's going to be hard to get elite there. And with that, I feel really good about this pick. So, James, you got anything to add there?
I will say, I do find it interesting that he goes 50th overall, and that's exactly where Stick to the Model has him ranked 50th. But no, he's a heck of a player. He is very commonly mocked. If you look up pretty much any two-round mock draft, besides the couple I looked at today that has Pons, Akis is, I think, by far the most popular vote with if we go O-line with the first pick. Um, but he is a guy that kind of surprised me, to be honest, because I mean, it's not like I watch a ton of Illinois football, but while watching defensive ends for the mock draft prep, one of these days I'll be able to talk. Uh, he kind of really jumped off the page for me because I've obviously heard about some of these more like Cassius uh, Howells and obviously like David Bailey's and stuff. But Akis, in terms of the pass rush, and I know you mentioned he's a pretty solid run defender too, and I'm not knocking him for that anymore or anything. But his pass rush is where I think he is somewhat undervalued because I feel like I won't quite say thrives, but he really excels in that area. And while I have seen people say like, yeah, he's a good pass rusher, I feel like it's still underselling it because I do think he has a more repertoire and more evolved skill set of pass rush moves than a lot of people are giving him credit for.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you there. Ryan, you got anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys summed it up pretty well, but obviously we know at this point what the type of edge the Lions kind of like in general. But I think this hits on kind of all sides pretty well with what they already have in house. They've got Wanham there. He can be a fill-in. He's a good enough run defender that if he's got to replace Wanham, he can on run plays. And then if they need him to go around the edge, because obviously Wanham, they view him as a three down defender, but I think I think this year they're looking more for guys that they can kind of plug and play and not have as much of the specialist format. Davenport for the first two downs, which obviously didn't work out, and then Muhammad for the pass, the obvious pass situation. So I think this hits it well. And of everybody on the board, I like that one. Zion Young, like you said, he's got some good traits. He's also, I'd be curious to see how that interview went with him and some of the off the field stuff. Really, the next one that you're getting to out of the old model of what the Lions look for is really Dennis Sutton, which you're having to kind of go a little bit into the depth from Penn State. I think this is a better value for them at 50. So yeah, it might be a little bit more predictable because we've been saying the whole time tackle then defensive end, but that's because it's kind of an obvious batch of needs here.
Yeah, and I think not only is it an obvious need for the Lions, it's also like where the draft is good with our picks as well. So we kind of got lucky there. And then also, to your point, I hope at least Brad Holmes is going to kind of get away from that, defensive end by committee approach and start being a little bit more, this guy's our guy, and then we rotate when needed. And then with that, I will be right back, but you guys, go ahead, keep going. Carolina is now on the clock with the 51st overall pick. Take it away.
All right. So, yeah, I've got Carolina. Again, they may have made the playoffs, but decent amount of needs. We had the edge discussion about what was on the board. They decided to go with the next guy up. They've got so they drafted Zion Young from Missouri. They obviously lost Wanham to the Lions, so I think the idea that they can fill him in and plug and play that'll solidify that position, because they've also been shedding the edge for a little while too, kind of like I said with the Chiefs, where they had a couple hits in successive years. That's kind of what's been happening with Carolina. They've been losing edge talent, so they've got to fill that need, and this is the best guy available. I like Yakis for the Lions, but Young for the Panthers seems like a good fit. What do you think, James?
I agree wholeheartedly. I think he's a better run defender than a pass rusher, but I don't think his pass rush is that lacking. But he does have, believe it was 16 and a half TFLs, and he kind of lives in that backfield one way or the other. So, as you mentioned, with Wynum coming to the Lions, they need to replace him, and with him being a run-first defensive end that has a bit of pass rush, I feel like he's pretty much the perfect fit for Carolina here.
So while I was gone, I didn't hear who it was. I'm assuming it was Zion Young, though, based on everything
Yes.
that was said.
Yes.
And I think that makes a ton of sense with
Lee
what
Hunter.
they already have. Yeah, right. That makes a ton of sense with what they already have along the defensive line. Obviously, they would, could opt for a little bit more pass rush, but now you've got a pretty fearsome front four there against the run, at least. So My apologies for the quick takeoff. I decided to go to the driving range before the podcast and drink a couple beers. So you know how that goes with your bladder. Um, with that being said, though, the Packers are now on the clock with the 52nd overall pick.
So yeah, they've had to wait a long time for their first pick here. With this is one of the teams that got doled out after the first round because they didn't have a first round pick. But we've been talking about corner a decent amount. They're obviously the top guy on the board is a corner. They didn't elect to take him, but they did go with corner, and they went Keith Abney of Arizona State. This is always, we obviously see a lot of Green Bay games in general as Lions fans, and this has always been a position that I thought they needed some reinforcement. I've talked about some of the teams where they've shedded some players at a given position, and this is true for the Packers where they've lost some of their stalwart corners. I think I know he's kind of elected as a nickel, but I think he's got some position flexibility there, and I think he fills a need for, again, one of the division rivals. James and I are both in this boat because we have to manage Minnesota and Green Bay. I think we both tried. I think James tried to trade everybody, all of Minnesota's picks to Jace for the Lions, but he had to turn that one down. But it's tough to manage these other teams. But I think that's a good fit for as far as need for Green Bay.
Yeah, unfortunately for the Lions, the commissioner stepped in and said, "Hold on a second, I don't think that's legal."
Yeah,
With
the
that,
entire Vikings draft class plus Justin Jefferson for a future sticks is just, I guess, not good enough.
it was Keith Abney, right? I just want to make sure before I.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. And then James, you got anything to add there?
I'm not too big of a fan of his, to be honest. I understand positional need, but I think he's only 1 inch taller than Pons, and I feel like his skill set is not as good. So I know Ryan's gonna love hearing me hype up an Indiana guy, but um, personally, I feel like with him being a inside guy, especially at least in terms of the Lions matching up, assuming Tesla is going to be our slot. I really like that matchup for the future. So, although this could be a very good pick, obviously I don't have hindsight. It would bring me joy as a Lions fan, and who knows? Like I said, maybe he completely puts the clamps on him. But time will tell, and yeah.
Yeah, and I personally am not super high or super low on Abney. I probably like Cisse a little bit more, but I do understand the Packers going the other route just for fit. But with that, the Pittsburgh Steelers are now on the clock with the 53rd overall pick, and we're going to stay on the offensive side of the ball. We went Caleb Lomu, the left tackle out of Utah, with our first pick. With our second pick, we're going to go ahead and go wide receiver and just take the best one on the board, Jeremy Bernard, one of my favorite receivers in this class. Kind of just like a do-it-all guy. Obviously, he's not super elite at any one thing, but like I said, he can do it all. And putting him with DK Metcalf and Michael Pittman, I think he's a perfect fit. And now you can kind of do whatever you want with your wide receiver trio there. So we go Jeremy Bernard out of Alabama at 53. Ryan, you got anything to add on that one?
No, I think it's a good pick, and they definitely need some receiver help. I feel like they're a team that's been shedding a lot of receivers over time too. I don't know what happens in their receiver room. There's something in the water in that receiver room, but hopefully Bernard brings his own water to the room.
Yeah, I think it might be something like that 49ers electric station sitting outside. Something ain't right with what's going on with the receivers over there. But with that, James, you got anything to add there?
No, not on this pick.
Gotcha. Eagles are now on the clock with the 54th overall pick.
Well, I hate to say this as somebody that covers the Lions and is a Lions fan, but Philadelphia, as managing their team, they really don't seem to have a lot of clear needs. I was getting a lot of depth pieces in this draft and trying to see what was available and matching it up best I can with their needs. Obviously, we got Proctor in the first round for them. Their secondary, even though they tend to spend a lot of attention and resources on it, it constantly seems like they still need help in the secondary. So that's where we targeted in the second round. Went with AJ Halsey of LSU. The safety was kind of a position that was, to me, trending a little bit like guard. the defense where maybe we needed to take advantage of getting a guy that's a more complete player now, and then kind of maybe skip some of those middle round guys and then go to the depth, because I think he's kind of in. There's probably a couple sub tiers within it, but he's towards that first tier, first batch of safeties, and I think will be a good movable piece for the Philadelphia defense, because they've got a lot of good pieces. You look at the roster, and there's a lot of good defensive backfield pieces. They added Woolen in, but they still are constantly adding, and they never seem to be really satisfied, and then they get injuries too, like the Lions have experienced. So yeah, they ended up with Halsey for this pick.
Yeah, and I really I like this pick, and I like Halsey, and I understand it. Simply they lost Blankenship, and they have to replace him. And like you said, they don't have a ton of needs. So some people would say maybe this is a small reach, but I don't really have a problem with it considering what they need, and I really do like the player here. With that, James, you got anything to add here?
Yeah, you set me up perfectly with that. I feel like he's actually underrated in this draft class. He has a lot of production. He had a 98 tackle season, and he also has 9 interceptions over his career, so he can do a little bit of ball hawking as well as coming downhill very well.
Hmm.
So with them, as you mentioned, losing Blankenship, I actually feel like this is a really strong pick to go with their corner tandem with DeJean and Quinton Mitchell. So I feel like Philly just keeps winning, so I think this is a perfect Philly pick.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you there. With that, Chargers are now on the clock with the 55th overall selection.
All right, so now this one is one thing I will say is probably a slight reach, but with all of these interior alignment, as Ryan kind of pointed out, they are going a little bit earlier just because of need. And if you don't draft your guy, you can't guarantee he'll be there when you think he will go. So you just got to go ahead and just take your guy. So I take Connor Liu from Auburn here, the center. The Chargers really need some interior O-line help. They had both of their tackles get hurt this past season with season-ending injuries. They are, at least last I heard, both supposed to be up and running, no problems lingering into the season. Um, but with that being said, he still has the Chargers still need some interior help, and I believe he is the best center remaining on the board to try to put I was gonna say bookend, but he's not the end at all. But put that anchor in the middle, and as you know how important a center is to an O line.
So my question, I have two things. First of all,
Yep.
this has nothing to do with your pick, but for some reason, the Chargers' number one need on this is tackle, which I think we can all agree
Yeah,
is
I
probably
saw
at the
that, but I've
bottom.
ignored it.
Yeah, I'm like tackle, huh? My second thing is who's going to play center, who's going to play guard out of Biotish and Lou?
I think Lou plays center and Biotish plays guard.
Okay, I don't
I
hate
could be
that.
wrong, but
Yeah,
that's what
I
I
don't
would.
hate it either way. And I was just curious because I think it works either way. I think both of them can play guard, both of them can play center. My only thing would be I would maybe uh, probably lean a little bit more towards Biotish at center only because he's a veteran. But again, I understand it
That's a
either
fair point.
way. But Ryan, do you have anything to add on this one?
Yeah, to your guys' points, I mean, it reinforces it either way. And although based on the board, it could be a little bit of a reach, I kind of could see this going this way in real life too, because there's not a premier center option. So there's going to be a team that's going to say, hey, we this is a clear need for us. There could be some running of those offensive linemen like we've talked about. And so I could see this being the range or even before it where the first center comes off the board. So as far as rating, that makes sense. What James said about the previous rating, and he's at 71 on the board, but he's essentially the number one rated pure center in the draft. So he's got to come off somewhat early, I would think.
Yeah, I totally agree there. And like you mentioned, it all just depends on, who needs what. And I think, the Chargers obviously need interior line here. So the Jacksonville Jaguars are now on the clock with the 56th overall pick.
That is also me, and with them having their first pick in this draft, because they do not have a first round pick, they're going to go receiver with the news that they are kind of uh, moving Hunter more towards a more permanent corner with a sprinkle in at receiver, which I personally think is a mistake, but That's the report. So I'm going to go with Chris Brazzell, the second. I almost said the third. The second from Tennessee here. I feel like he's the best receiver remaining on the board. He has 4.3 speed. He's 6'4" in height. He has pretty solid hands, and I feel like he can be that number one receiver if they did want to kind of move off Brian Thomas Jr., which I don't know why. Personally, there's a lot of reports out there saying he might get traded. I like him a lot. If the Lions weren't completely loaded at receiver, I'd tell him to get on it. But I'm more than happy with the Lions receivers. But with Brazel and Brian Thomas Jr., you have a lot of size at receiver, and that's going to cause a mismatch for several other teams.
Yeah, and my only, not that it's not really an issue with this pick. My only question is, are you running 4 wide receivers a lot? Because I sure hope so.
Yeah.
With Jacoby Myers and oh my gosh, I'm blanking. Obviously Brian Thomas,
Brian
and
Thomas,
then
Myers.
Preston. Oh my gosh, I cannot believe I can't remember his name. Anyway, he was pretty good for him at the end of the season there, especially into the playoffs. So I would be pretty surprised if the Jaguars do end up going receiver here, but I do understand it because Brazel, I think, is a pretty good player. So with that, Ryan, you got anything to add here?
Are you talking about Parker Washington?
Yes, Parker Washington.
Yeah, I agree with what you guys are saying. Yeah, it is an interesting move. James, you are the GM of the team. So when you say about the Hunter thing, I'd like to hear you kind of extrapolate on that a little bit because it is interesting. It's a unique player. And I also wanted to notify the audience that there were some proposals for Thomas. There's just nothing that materialized. So that's an interesting tidbit because there were some teams that were interested in Thomas, but James believed in him and then kept him in house.
Yeah, and I believe I was a few of those teams that were interested in Thomas. I want to say almost every team that I have was somewhat interested. And, you know, it was really just because of the price point that I've heard a lot of people, and obviously James didn't agree with this price point or we would have come to a trade. But, you know, a 4th round, 5th round pick's about the price that most people are saying for Thomas, which I totally understand just sitting and waiting with that price point because he is a hell of an athlete, a hell of a player. Man, he was bad last year. And not like he was just horrible on film. It was like a mental blockage for him. It seemed like he had the yips, for lack of a better way to say it. So hopefully he can overcome that and it works out for them. But with that, the Chicago Bears are now on the clock. Very true. Bears down, baby. With that, we went interior defensive line with our first pick in the first round, in which, you know, we each have an NFC North team, so we all have to, unfortunately, draft for our rivals, and still have to do a good job. If it were up to me, I would have taken a kicker here, but it was only up to me to an extent. So with that, we are going to go ahead and draft Brandon Cisse, the corner out of South Carolina. By the board, he is easily the best player available. However, Chicago has a bunch of needs, and I think their top 2 is interior D-line and corner, and I think we get 2 starters here in the 1st and 2nd round. So I am very happy with that as the Bears GM, and I think, honestly, Cisse is better than Nahshon Wright, who left in free agency for us. So I am happy with the upgrade there. James, you got anything to add?
I like the pick, just kind of like my Christian Miller pick for the Vikings. It's a counter move because a lot of teams in the NFC North have great receivers, so you cannot really be lacking at corner.
Mm-hmm.
So between shoring up that D line with your first pick and then adding a corner in the second makes total sense.
Yeah, and I definitely agree there. Obviously, because I made the pick. But with that, Ryan,
it'd be weird if you didn't.
Right? Like, man, that was stupid. But Ryan, you got anything to add there?
Yeah, the board fell nicely for him. I think that's a good pick. And now my co-host on Thursday, Shane Graham, would also be a fan of them taking a kicker too. So I mean, you know, if so you wouldn't be the only one there. But no
bias there.
Yeah, exactly. but there is and that is worth mentioning to the audience that obviously we might joke around about, hey, we got the rivals or whatever, but we're trying to do the best job for all these teams and kind of drafting their image to a degree too, because there's times where I took players that maybe wouldn't be my favorite. I actually have one of those coming up, but it's actually it's a preview of the next pick here. But I think it's a good fit for that team and kind of how they draft. So we try to take on the identities here. But yeah, I think it's a good fall to them, slam dunk pick.
And that's a perfect segue as the San Francisco 49ers are now on the clock.
Yeah, so this was kind of the reverse of Philadelphia to me. It's a team that is in that upper tier or regarded in that upper tier of the NFC or has been in recent times. But when I really took a deep dive into the roster, they have a decent amount of needs, and so it was kind of picking and choosing. But they obviously like to keep the pressure on from the defensive line. We've been talking about building the trenches here the whole time. So although this maybe wasn't, my top guy left, we've got a lot of the defensive ends that have been taken. I thought R. Mason Thomas was a good fit as a rotational, kind of to the point that we were talking about with James, as far as the rotational defensive ends, a guy that can get in the rotation. He might not be an every down guy, but he can get in the rotation. He's a little undersized, but he plays with a decent amount of power for his size. So I figured they would reload and add somebody to that room. But yeah, decent amount of needs. I had to kind of pick and choose. It was more of a triage situation than I thought initially when I looked at the roster.
Yeah, and like you said, the 49ers have a lot of holes, and I think you fill one pretty well. R. Mason Thomas isn't necessarily my favorite player. There is another edge that is going to go here soon that I like a little bit more. But I understand going there because, I think he does fit what they're looking for. He fits across from Nick Bosa well, and he is just like pure finesse, pure speed rusher. So I think it makes a lot of sense for that. James, you got anything to add?
James, you're on mute.
Thank you. I like the pick. I'm a big fan of trenches, as I mentioned over and over. And I'm also a big fan of I don't quite want to say overloading position, but just adding to a strength. Make a good thing a great thing. And with adding R. Mason Thomas to D-line with Bosa, assuming he's obviously coming back healthy, and with them taking Michael Williams in the first round last year, I think, as you mentioned, you have a real good tandem of pass rushers that you can keep moving in and out. Because just like how the Lions were using Montgomery and Gibbs, rotating them in and out so that way their legs are still fresh in the fourth quarter. If you do that with your pass rushers, you can really start getting into some tired alignment and really causing havoc all game long, but especially in the second half.
Yeah, and I agree there, and especially considering the type of player R. Mason Thomas is, I think he gives you for lack of a better way to say it, it's kind of like your speed back and your power back. You know what I mean? You got a speed rusher and a power rusher, and they complement each other very well. Now the Texans are on the clock with the 59th overall pick. And obviously we went Dexter Lawrence with the 28th overall pick, pretty much. And then we went Chris Bell, wide receiver out of Louisville, with our first second rounder. With our second rounder, we're going to go back to the defensive side of the ball, and we're going to take, in my opinion, one of my favorite linebackers in this draft, Josiah Trotter. I think he fits perfectly what the Texans are looking for, and they've really not had that top tier linebacker. Akeem Davis Gaither is the best that they've had in the last few years. So I think Josiah Trotter fits perfectly into what they need. He's a great mic backer for this defense. And I think, your head coach being an ex linebacker himself can kind of relate to Josiah Trotter in his game, in his play style and things like that. So I think DeMeco Ryans would be very happy with this selection. With getting a really, really good run defender in the middle of this defense after adding Dexter Lawrence. Ryan, do you have anything to add on this one?
Yeah, I really like the pick. I'm high on Trotter too. I think it is kind of in that top tier, and I think you hit the nail on the head with the fact that you got Lawrence. He's going to make life easier for the linebackers, and although they haven't had elite talent or Lawrence up until this point, they really have played pretty well with the level of talent that they've had at linebacker. So you got to think with Ryans as the coach, with the defensive minded coach, with Lawrence adding into the middle there, now adding Trotter, I think the sky's the limit for him in that type of defense with that situation. I think he's smiling from ear to ear being this pick. This is a perfect situation for him.
Oh yeah, and like we mentioned before, the interior D line or the D line in general makes it easier for the linebackers. So I think that's a great point. James, you got anything to add on this one?
I'm not as big on him as I am some of the other linebackers, but um, the somewhat side note, the last name rang a bell, so I tried to look it up, and sure enough, his dad is Jeremiah Trotter, one of my favorite linebackers I watched growing up. So it's just another moment that makes me just feel old. Because I'm just like, I know a Trotter that's a linebacker. I'm like, oh, okay, sure enough. And yeah, it's that's just the prevalent thought in my head right now. But he's not a bad linebacker by any imagination. I think he's better against the run than pass coverage or anything like that. But to be honest, actually, for Houston, he might actually be the perfect guy just because they have so many other pass rushers, so many other things they can do. Um, so actually, thinking out loud, talking about this pick, I actually like it a hell of a lot more than initially.
Yeah, and that was exactly my line of thought as well. We can kind of cover up a little bit of his negatives, and I think getting three really good starters, essentially with your first three picks, is a win for the Texans. Now, I hate to say this, but the Chicago Bears are back on the clock with the 60th pick, and man, I feel like they have done a hell of a job with their draft, and that's not just because I am the GM, which obviously part of
I
it.
say, of course you would.
Right? They have a lot of players that I really like, man. It's weird. But no, with that, obviously we went Caden McDonald, interior D line, and then Brandon Cisse, the corner, recently, and we're gonna stay on the defensive side of the ball. We're gonna go Malachi Lawrence, the edge rusher from UCF. Now, I love this if I'm the Bears or a Bears fan, and I hate this if I'm a Lions fan because they just added a big run stuffer in the middle of their defense, and then they added I'm not going to say a lockdown corner, but I think a guy that could become a number one corner in the NFL at his very best. And then you get a guy like Malachi Lawrence that, yeah, he's a little bit older, he's more of a pass rush specialist, but man, that defense just added a lot of talent. So, as a Lions fan, I'm a little hurt right now, considering I think their defense is is the way we're gonna beat the Bears for the next 5 years. So, with that, Malachi Lawrence to the Chicago Bears. And James, do you have anything to add there?
No, you summed it up perfectly. That's adding yet another top talent on defense to the Bears, which the defense was, as you mentioned, their weakness. So, with Ben Johnson obviously masterminding the offense, with Caleb Williams still evolving and whatnot, getting better a little bit every year. Um, with this mock, I'm glad it's a mock and not a real one because the Bears would have quite a bit of talent added to that defense, and it would be a pain in the ass to deal with them.
Yeah, and I don't think Lawrence will fall here on the actual draft night. I think it's just the way the board fell for us. I do think there's going to be a run on edges at the beginning of that second round, and I think Lawrence will be one of them. So, Ryan, you got anything to add on that?
Yeah, just that it's the juxtaposition of what we've talked about with maybe not reaching, but going heavier into other positions. There's going to be some value picks here, and I think this was one of them that the Bears took advantage of. But I'm with you that he's probably not going to be on the board. I think he's in that second tier, however many kind of micro tiers you want to make of the edges, but he's the last one maybe of this current tier, and then it kind of drops off. So I could see him being off the board earlier. But yeah, for the purposes of this draft, it's a great pick.
Yeah, and with that, the Rams are now on the clock. Again, me. Somehow I got three picks in a row here. But the Rams went Spencer Fano, the lineman out of Utah, with our first round pick, and we are going to stay on the offensive side of the ball and take Zachariah Branch, the wide receiver out of Georgia. I think a lot of NFL teams would see this card get turned in and go, are you kidding me right now? Like they would be like, we're giving Sean McVay another 4-3 guy who has really high level yak ability and can offer some some things that their other two receivers in Puka and Devontae Adams can't. And obviously, he is a burner, and like I said, he is a threat with the ball in his hands. So putting him in this Rams offense after adding, another really good offensive lineman, I think the Rams are gearing up for another Super Bowl run. Not to say that it's going to happen, but that is obviously what they're trying to do. Ryan, you got anything to add on this one?
Yeah, great fit in the offense here. I think this is a great fit with Stafford and the other pieces that they have. And there's some question marks with those other guys too. You don't know. Devontae's towards the tail end of his career, and then you got Puka, who has maybe some off the field issues. I don't want to theorize too much there, but yeah, a guy that can fill in. They've had a very good succession plan there in general, because Kupp was very important, and all of a sudden Puka appeared, and now they've got Branch, and then they added Adams into the mix. So yeah, that'd be a great target for Stafford, also from his alma mater too, so that doesn't hurt.
That's very true. And then James, you got anything to add here?
No, as you guys mentioned, I think it's a great pick. They have some question marks between age and off the field issue at wide receiver, and he's a heck of a receiver that fills a need.
And I can definitely agree there as the one who made the pick. With that, the Denver Broncos are now on the clock as we, get to the end of this second round.
Yeah, I'm not going to leave anyone in suspense here. I'm going to take Eli Stower, the tight end from Vanderbilt. I think he is kind of flying a little bit under the radar. I mean, I realize according to Sickland Model, he's only a few picks off his projection here. But he is a tall 6'3", 240 tight end who was a four-star quarterback recruit coming out of high school to college before he converted to tight end. He has great hands. He's a good vertical threat. And how do I want to word this? I have a soft spot for the more cerebral players, and I feel like being a former quarterback, he can kind of read that defense, find soft spots in the zone a little better. Um, and I feel like that gives him a little edge over some of the players that are, I guess, more traditional tight ends. But with his size, speed, and good hands catching, which I also think is key, he doesn't do a lot of body catching. I feel like he is a great weapon for Bo Nix and that offense.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree there. I like Stowers, and I do think he is a guy who could even play some receiver at the next level. Because I've heard a lot of teams kind of like him as like a pure X receiver. However, I do think he would be that perfect. They call it the Joker position for
Yeah.
the Sean Payton offense. So I think he would be what they wanted Evan Ingram to be. Fortunately for them. With that, Ryan, do you got anything else to add here?
Another position that's kind of slotted oddly, as far as Sadiq's obviously going to be first one off the board. He's going to go pretty high, but yeah, it'd be hard to see this kind of deficit between the first and the second tight end going off the board. So kind of like we were talking about with center, it'll be interesting to watch how this actually goes in the draft, because I could see some teams, especially with a lot of teams. I mean, you know this better than anybody, Jace. There's a lot of teams that obviously are loading up on tight ends for the heavier personnel. And so I think there's going to be a bit of a run on them, because even if you have somebody in place, you're going to want a pretty deep room there.
Yeah, and I that's a great point. I think the tight end class is very similar to the linebacker class in that way that like there are a few guys that are at the top of that class that look pretty good. And honestly, I think call me crazy. I have Oscar Delp over Max Clare. I know they have Max Clare like 50 spots ahead on this, but I think Delp's going to get drafted in the top 75 picks. But with that, I think, you have Sadiq, Stowers, and Delp, and then it kind of drops off. And then in the fifth and sixth round, it picks up a little bit again. So you could get some value there. With that, New England is now on the clock with the 63rd overall pick.
All right, if my computer screen will stop freezing here, I will let you know. Come on. Okay, here we go. New England needs a weapon, in my opinion, to that offense. And I know it's going to give Ryan a lot of pride, but I'm going to go with Elijah. I think it's Starrett,
Surratt.
the
Surratt. Yep.
Surratt, the wide receiver from Indiana. Um, Decent body size. He's not like 6 foot. He's 6'2", so he's not huge, but he's not small by any means. He can kind of do a little bit of everything, and he is, in my opinion, exceptional with his route running. So I feel like he can be a guy that kind of creates his own havoc, and a person that Drake May, a young quarterback, could really use to take him to the next level, even after he had a pretty great season without him.
Yeah, and I personally am a little bit lower on Surratt. I have him more of like a third round pick, but I understand the thought process on that one.
It's 2 picks away
Uh,
from the third round.
well, I mean like late third.
Oh,
But yeah, but still, it's I understand the pick. Ryan, you got anything to add on this one?
Well, I'm going to echo what James said earlier. Peer pressure works. He got me to not take an IU guy. Now I got him to take an IU guy. No, I can see your opinion on it too, Jace, because I did watch a lot of them, and it's interesting because I think Cooper, you're better with where we started the year at, but Cooper would have been behind Surratt at the beginning of the year as far as projections, and then Cooper with some of his precise body control and route running, I think got ahead of Surratt. One of my favorite nicknames, he nicknamed himself Waffle House, so I do like that. I'll throw that as a tidbit in there. But no, I'm curious how he's going to do at the next level, because although they had a good group of receivers and good weapons, they also had the guy that's the number one pick in the class. So how much was Mendoza? How much was the receivers? We'll be able to see as they kind of separate themselves from each other.
Yeah, for sure. Seattle is now on the clock with the 64th overall pick.
So this one might be the easiest pick in the draft, I think, so far, to a degree, as far as outside of the first round, kind of obvious ones at the top. I think they would be fortunate if Jadarian Price falls to them at this point, 64 in the draft. I didn't say this when they picked McNeil Warren in the first round, but this is their other obvious need. It just wasn't a good fit for the end of the first round because talent and kind of valuation wise, it would have been a bit of a reach. So I think we mentioned this when we did the first round iteration. That's not part of this iteration of our draft process, but I do think that Seattle could be a very good trade down candidate if somebody wants to go get Ty Simpson and not worry about competing for him in the second round and adding that fifth year in, as James pointed out initially. So because the other thing with them is they don't have a lot of picks in this draft. I know they won the Super Bowl, but they've got some holes to fill. But this is an obvious one with Walker leaving after the Super Bowl victory here.
Yeah, and I find it kind of hilarious that the top two running backs in this draft both went to Notre Dame, and they went 60 picks away from each other. So we've talked a lot about disparity, throughout this draft class with positions and things, and I think that might be the biggest one. And quarterbacks obviously up there too. But with that, James, do you have anything to add here?
no, as you mentioned, two great Notre Dame running backs. I think there's two pretty good Penn State ones that will come off the board coming up. Maybe like late third, early fourth, or something like that. But I do find it interesting that a lot more teams are kind of going to that tandem, and I feel like it's paying off. I feel like there's not obviously no injuries. Running backs are often hurt, but less than before, and it's really also showcasing kind of double the amount of talent. So with each team putting two more out there. So even though he is running back two, because I've seen some people when talking about him say, he's running back two on his own team. It's like Jeremiah Love's pretty great. So let's not act like he's sitting behind, a random.
Yeah, that's for sure. And obviously, Seattle getting a running back here to replace Kenneth Walker is very good value, with it being the number two back. And like you mentioned, Ryan, there's talks that he might go at 32. So a whole round later, and you still get the same player. With that, that will end the second round of the 2026 MFN NFL mock draft. So with that, we're going to take a quick break just for some ads. And if you guys need to go to the bathroom or anything like that, if not, we'll just keep rolling. With that though, check out Fanatics. Great place to get some sports memorabilia, some sports apparel. I personally love it for their NBA jerseys, their shirts, their hats, things like that. You can get all types of stuff on Fanatics. If you look behind me here, there's a sign. There's a couple signs behind me that I bought from Fanatics. There's a flag that I bought as well. So they have a lot of really good stuff there. And I personally think it's a good place to go. I know there's been a lot of discourse lately about, their NFL jerseys, and that's fine. Just don't buy their NFL jerseys. I think they have a lot of other really, really good stuff, to add there. So with that being said, our other ad for today is stick to the model, which is what we're using right now. If you take a look at our screen right now, this is the stick to the model mock draft simulator. Now we have a premium subscription, so that allows you to get a little bit more stuff. You can unlimited mocks, unlimited be a GMs. They also have the really cool be a GM mode, which lets you literally be the GM of the team. You go from free agency, the draft, and everything. You can also simulate seasons, which is pretty cool. So you can kind of see what your team would do in that simulation, and also you get to look at the depth chart and kind of reorder it. So that's another really cool way to look at it. Based on what you did in the free agency and what you did in the draft. So really, really cool software here. And obviously it is free, but you can pay a very small amount. I think it's like $2 a month for their basic, and it adds a lot. I think it is worth it personally. And then also, before we move on to the third round of this mock draft, Michigan Football Network will be at Michigan Spring Game tomorrow. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I know there have been some reports recently that Michigan was not going to play their starters and everything like that. However, today there was a report that came out and said Bryce Underwood even is going to play the first quarter. So that should be a lot of fun. And like I said, we will be there in person. So stay tuned for some updates on our X account, as well as when we bring back when we come back to the podcast next week. With that, everybody is back. So we will continue rolling into the third round here, and the Arizona Cardinals kick it off with the 65th overall selection. And we're going to kind of go rapid fire here in this third round, as we have taken quite a bit of time for the second round, which is always fun to go through and explain each pick. But for this third round, we're just gonna, like I said, go rapid fire and kind of give our reasoning for the pick, and then we'll kind of move on from there. So with that, the Arizona Cardinals are going to select Jayshawn Barham, the linebacker slash edge out of Michigan. Now, obviously, he's not the highest ranked player. He's ranked 83rd currently right now, but I think the versatility that he adds to this defense is much needed. We need linebacker help. We need edge help. And I know the Cardinals have a bad taste in their mouth, with linebackers that can play other roles. Obviously, Zaven Collins and Isaiah Simmons were drafted by them pretty high to do that. However, I think Jayshawn Barham offers a little bit more as an edge rusher than Zaven did. And I really like him as, just like a speed finesse rusher off the edge. And he's super raw and he's super athletically gifted. So I really like this pick for the Cardinals, give him some versatility on defense. And with that, the Tennessee Titans are now on the clock.
You're muted, James. Sorry.
Thank you. No. I'm very glad you spoke up, because I'm just like, oh. I feel like when I mute myself, I chime in less, so it gets things rolling a little more, but then sometimes I forget to unmute myself.
I feel that.
With the Titans needing a little bit of everything, obviously we got to go to the trenches after taking 2 offensive weapons. I have them taking Caleb Tiernan, I think is how you pronounce it. I'm all over the place with these names, sorry. I feel like he is the next best offensive lineman that is still remaining, at least tackle-wise. And I feel like between the 2 new weapons I gave them in the other 2 rounds, and now a protector for Cam Ward, I feel like Cam Ward is having a field day with my draft.
Yeah, and you did pronounce that one right.
Yes.
And tackle's another one that kind of falls off. So I understand taking this pick here, and it's really only 1 pick away from where they have him. So not a
I
reach.
didn't even pay attention to that.
Right.
That's a bonus.
True. Not a reach necessarily. I know some people might you know, say, oh, they could go whatever, but like we saw, the tackles drop off after that. So with that, the Vegas Raiders are now on the clock.
So we talked a little bit about Fernando and his receivers at Indiana. One of the things that he really kind of leaned on at Indiana was the boundary throw. He made a lot of sideline throws, and he values receivers that can have the body control and contested catch ability. And I think he kind of made the receivers into that to a degree. That arguably the best one at that is still at Indiana. It wasn't Surratt or Cooper; it was Becker. So Vegas needs somebody that obviously they need receivers in general. They need somebody that can fill that void. Malachi Fields to me is the best fit for Fernando at quarterback. He's a classic X receiver, and I believe his first note in Stick to the Model is dominant contested catch ability. That's kind of like Fernando's version of "You Had Me at Hello." He was ready to take him and go and run with it. But I think that'll be a good pairing for years to come there in Las Vegas.
Yeah, and I definitely agree there. And obviously, you need your rookie quarterback to have more weapons, and he kind of fills that Jacoby Myers, X receiver that they just got rid of. So the Eagles are now on the clock with the 68th overall pick.
So Jace just had the tidbit about Barham there. It's going to be interesting to see how this duo actually goes in the draft. But Philadelphia elected to get some edge help and go with Derek Moore out of Michigan. It'll be interesting to see which one goes first. They have very different skill sets. I thought this was a good fit for the Eagles. A rotational guy. He's not going to need to play every down for them. They again, not a lot of needs for this team. So I thought this was a good depth piece for them.
Yeah, and I think it just depends on what you want because, like you said, they're completely different players. And I would not be surprised if Moore goes first. I know the NFL really, really likes Moore, so that wouldn't surprise me at all. With that, the Texans are now on the clock yet again. It seems like they have so many picks in this top 100. But we are going to go ahead and take another Trenches player. We are going to go ahead and select Jake Slaughter, the center out of Florida. And I know Logan Jones is sitting there and he's a little bit higher ranked. However, I like Slaughter more. I think he has a little bit more athletic upside. I think, Jones is going to have a lot of issues with his length at the next level. And that's not really what you want as at your center position, a guy who's going to have to go up against a guy like, say, Caleb Banks from Florida, who is a 6'6", 330-pound behemoth of a man. I don't really feel like Logan Jones is necessarily going to be able to, make that block on a consistent basis. So I go ahead and go with Jake Slaughter. And I think center is probably our biggest need at this point. So obviously it might be a little bit of a reach in terms of value, but like we mentioned with the other center, there's not a lot of good ones in this draft, so you got to take them when you can. And then with that, the Browns are now on the clock. Muted.
I couldn't say it that time. I needed you to say it. I couldn't say it too much.
The one drawback of waking up at 4 a.m. for your 9 to 5.
Very
Sorry.
true.
With Jake Slaughter now being taken, and as Jace mentioned, kind of a thin center group, and the Browns needing all these linemen, as I mentioned, they had all 5 of their, or I should say, as I mentioned last show, as they have all these linemen that hit free agency. I did go with Logan Jones. I do think he is slightly under Jake Slaughter for many of the reasons Jay said. However, he is still, in my opinion, a plug-and-play day one starter at center, especially with what the Browns have kind of going on now. And I feel like for the third round, this is value, especially with going with Ty Simpson. You got to protect your young quarterbacks, and unless you're the Bengals for some reason, but you have to protect your young quarterbacks. And with the other 2 centers already being off the board, one of the other ones drafted by me, I will go with Logan Jones and kind of get when the getting's good with this.
And, I don't disagree with the pick. I will say I think I like Sam Hecht a little bit more personally, but I do understand going with Logan Jones here. With that, the Commanders are now on the clock with our, I think, second pick in this draft. And call me crazy. We went Caleb Downs with our first pick, defensive back out of Ohio State. And I'm going to take another defensive back here, Zakee Wheatley out of Penn State. I personally really, really love Zakee Wheatley, and I know he's lower on this list, but I think he is one of the best pure free safety ball hawk type of guys in this draft class. And I think Caleb Downs, we've all talked about, is more of a box kind of safety. But I think they needed two safeties coming into this draft, and I think they get two guys that fit what they're looking for, fit what they need. And I think Zakee Wheatley also offers a very high athletic upside that you might not see from some of the other guys that are still available here on the board. So that's why I went there with the Commanders, and now the Bengals are on the clock with the 72nd overall pick.
So we've talked a lot about the tie of linebacker to defensive tackle. They took a linebacker earlier in the round, or in the second round here with Jacob Rodriguez. There's been a name. It's not. I promise it's not because I felt bad for him, but there's been a name at the front of this draft for a while here. You can see a difference of 19 picks between Lee Hunter and the next guy. So they're going to go with Lee Hunter, shore up that middle of the defense, build in the trenches, and then give Rodriguez a piece to work with because he worked with him before. That's also a theme that I'm going for to a degree because I think it's a softer landing when you have a teammate from college that you then travel to the pros with. That's one of the things that I've talked to some of the athletes on my show that I've interviewed about, that sometimes it's easier when, you're in a new city, new level of football. You travel with one of your former teammates and it makes it feel more like home when you're in a completely different location. So not that I necessarily did that intentionally every time. Sometimes it was happenstance, but I do think that helps. And I thought that was a talented player to put in the middle of the defense. And then also I'd like to use my clip from earlier where James said, hey, he's a defensive tackle that doesn't push the pocket a ton, but he takes up a lot of space. Just insert that here in post.
And I really like the pick. Obviously, best player available on the board per the stick to the model mock. However, obviously the Bengals need defensive help all over the place. So, like you said, pairing him with his, ex-teammate Rodriguez, I think makes a lot of sense there because he's going to clean up the blocks for Rodriguez to make the tackles. And with that, the
It
Saints
worked
are
really
now on
well
the
for the Rams when they took two Florida State D linemen a couple years ago.
That it did. Very true. Saints are now on
Um,
the clock, though.
Saints, they once again they need help all over the place, and I would take, in my opinion, the best available, and it looks like stick to the model's best player available. Trade in Stukes, I believe is how you say that. He is just a kind of rangy safety, and like I said, I'm not trying to pick on him, but the Saints need a little bit of everything. So with safety being a need and him being the top talent available, in my opinion, and stick to the model's opinion, I just take it and kind of move on.
Yeah, and I definitely like this pick. Trey is another one of those versatile safeties that can kind of play all over the place. So, like you said, the Saints need help all over, so get them a player that can do a little bit of everything. With that, the Chiefs are on the clock.
So they saw that there's a little bit of a run in safety here. I mentioned that they need defensive backfield help. They added Pons before, but they ended up going with Kamari Ramsey, the safety out of USC. Pair those two guys together to kind of shore up some of the issues in the defensive backfield. It's a team with kind of some sneaky needs, and that seemed to be a good fit considering the fact that, there is a little bit of a run on safety. So you didn't know when you could grab one. They decided to take advantage and grab one now.
Well, I definitely like the pick, and it makes a lot of sense. And with that, the Dolphins are on the clock, and we're going to keep this safety draft rolling. Jalen Kilgore out of South Carolina is our pick at 75, and there's a plethora of reasons for that. along with Keontae Scott, Jalen Kilgore is one of my favorite players in this draft for very similar reasons. A guy who's very versatile, can kind of play all over the defense. And, obviously going Jermod McCoy and then Denzel Boston, and then Keelan Rutledge. Here we add a safety corner hybrid kind of guy who, like I said, adds some versatility to the defense and is definitely not afraid to come down in the run. So I really like the fit there. And then 76, the Pittsburgh Steelers are on the clock, which is another one of my teams. We went Lomu in the first, Bernard in the second, and in the third, we're going to take somebody that might surprise some people here because there's another name at the same position that a lot of people really love. But I'm taking Garrett Nussmeier to the Pittsburgh Steelers simply because we need quarterback. I don't know if Aaron Rodgers is coming back. I'm not going to count on that. And I do think Nuss is very, very underrated in this draft class. Obviously, he had a bad season last year. However, he was coming into this draft class as like most people's number one overall pick. So I think that's great value. And obviously, we're not going to just go based on that. But I do like the player, and I think he might even be able to start week 1 for us. Now, is that what I want? No. But if Rodgers comes back, I think Nuss is a great guy to sit behind him. So, and then now the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are on the clock.
One quick note, we were talking about the safety run, that it does seem like in the stick to the model rankings, some of the hybrid guys are a little underrated because Kilgore at 120 seems that way. I'm also higher on him. Scott, we talked about him earlier. So they might be rating him kind of pure position versus what he can do across all positions. But yeah, as far as Tampa goes here, some of the strategy with them is somewhat similar to what the Lions go for. Obviously, they poached 2 Lions off of the team with Anzalone and Muhammad. I think they like some of the same players, but having Muhammad there, I think they need some defensive end help to supplement him, kind of like the Lions had to. So they're going to go with a guy that I mentioned as a possible fit for the Lions earlier, Dennis Sutton out of Penn State. I think he's kind of more the heavy edge kind of guy that Tampa and the Lions, for that matter, tend to prefer. And so we'll shore up the defensive line there and add to Muhammad in the offseason.
Yeah, and the Bucs have done a very good job in this draft, with building through the trenches, because if I can remember correctly, you guys also went offensive line and then
Dunker earlier.
Was it? Okay, it was Sadiq. Okay, I'm misremembering. I was thinking Keldrick Falk at 15, but that's because we've done that so many times in our mock drafts. But either way, Kenyon Sadiq is another sort of trenches edition, but the Bucs really obviously want to build up there. With that, the Colts are now on the clock. And we're going to keep the safety run going. I think the third round is the round of the safeties for us. And I'm going to go Bud Clark out of TCU. Obviously, I went Keontae Scott with our first pick in this draft. But that was more of like a Kenny Moore, like one-to-one replacement. Obviously, he can play some safety too, but he's probably going to be more of a corner for the Colts. We're going to go with somebody who is kind of the opposite, pure safety, kind of a deep field safety here with Bud Clark, and we're trying to replace what we lost with Nick Scott. So obviously, one of those guys that we really like. Me and James really liked him all throughout free agency as well, but unfortunately he left. So we're gonna have to replace him, and we do that with Bud Clark. And then
I like Bud Clark too.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of his. And then we also I am next again with the Atlanta Falcons being on the clock. And we go with another defensive back, another versatile guy. We go with Davison Igbonason from Ohio State. Honestly, I didn't know a ton about this guy going into my draft prep. But as I'm reading more about him, I like him a lot more. I think he fits what the Falcons want out of a corner. And like I said, he adds some versatility. I don't think he's going to play a ton of safety in the NFL. He's going to be more of a outside corner. But I think this is good value with a good player for Atlanta. And with that, the Ravens are on the clock.
Yeah, thank you for taking that last guy because I would not go with that name. He was on my eyesight just because the Baltimore could use a corner, and once you took him, I'm like, okay, I'm okay with that. Baltimore, I have them taking Max Clare, the tight end from Ohio State here. Um, I feel like their tight end room could use another one, obviously with Isaiah Likely on his way out. And I think, and I hate to say this with every pick because then it just sounds cliche. I think Claire's kind of underrated as Sixth Model has him, going a little bit earlier. And he's even a guy, granted, I know the Lions don't have a third, but if we decide to trade up and whatnot, I wouldn't be completely surprised if the Lions do kind of target him a little bit between him or Delp, just because of like Laporta's injury and a little bit of the unknown. But since obviously I'm in charge of the Ravens and they lost likely, I will fill in Claire here.
Personally, like I mentioned before, I am higher on Delp than Claire, but that's excuse me, to each their own. However, it does make sense for the Ravens there. With that, the Jaguars are now on the clock.
As the Jaguars GM, back-to-back picks here. I'm the Vikings too, so I got the next one too. With the Jaguars once again kind of saying how they want Hunter to play more safety than receiver, since I'm the GM of the team, I'm actually going to go safety here and take Genesis Smith from Arizona State. I feel like he can kind of be the Robin to Hunter's Batman at safety, and if you, in my opinion, because I know we already took a receiver with Brazel, but if you if you hit on both positions, you can kind of free up Hunter to do a little bit more of each, because I do think he thrives in kind of that both role. And the one thing I kind of feel slightly surprising, and some people disagree with me, and that's obviously fine. But if you made Hunter one-dimensional, I think he's actually a better receiver than corner, in my personal opinion. So I kind of find it a little strange that they have him more focused on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and I somewhat agree there. I think Travis Hunter is more um impactful at receiver. I do think he's a better player at corner. Like if you were to grade him at corner as a corner and grade him at receiver, I think his corner grade would be higher, but he adds a lot more impact with the ball in his hands because I think that's where he's at his absolute best is when he has that ball in his hands. And which is another reason why, they're moving him to corner. He's got great zone instincts and everything like that, but I do expect them to use him a little bit as a receiver still. With that, though, the Vikings are now on the clock.
With the Vikings pick here at 82, um, I have Julian Neal, the corner from Arkansas. He is a speedy and pretty big for a corner. He's 6'2", 200 pounds, and I feel like he can add a little bit of grit to the Viking secondary, who, like I mentioned, kind of with them taking a safety in round one, need help pretty desperately to their defensive backs. The NFC North has a ton of receivers, and you kind of have to not necessarily draft, but build your team to win your division because you got to see these guys 6 times. So when you're playing against, obviously everyone knows the Lions' threats, but you add on, I almost said DJ Moore, not anymore, but Roma Dunze and Colston Loveland. That's such an easy name. I watched him all the time at Michigan, but I'm just stumbling today. My apologies. Um, you need a lot more help in the defensive back room, and I think Neal will provide that for them, even if, according to Stick to the Model, it is a slight reach there.
Yeah, and I think, Vikings fans have been wanting good corners for about a decade now. So, really, ever since Xavier Rhodes kind of fell off,
I
they
was
have
just about to
not
say,
had
road's
good.
open.
Yeah, right. True that. They really haven't had good luck with corners. I mean, Byron Murphy's been pretty good for them, but they found him in free agency. So, I think, Vikings fan will be happy there. The Panthers are now on the clock.
So again, I feel like I've been taking a lot of the defensive tackles here. I'm keeping up with that. That's one of my trends in the draft. And you can't resist a guy whose nickname is Big Citrus, Dominique Orange. The nickname may have influenced me. Put the clip from James in here about being kind of a boulder in the run game and then not pushing the pocket a ton, but they need some help through the middle there. So that's who we went with for Carolina.
Yeah, and once again, like you picked with your other Panthers picks, some trench help, and their D line is looking even better than it did before this draft. So, and I think it was pretty solid prior too. So, I think Panthers fans would be happy there. The Packers are now on the clock.
Well, the Packers seem to just like to give all their edge people to the Cowboys, so they need some help. Because they just keep giving all the edge players away. So, little bit of as you can kind of see from the best available, 3 of those guys are edges right now. So probably a run coming, but they ended up taking K'Ron Crawford out of Auburn. Of those 3, there's probably an argument that could be made for all 3 of them, but that was the best fit for them in their opinion. And then they can kind of fill in for losing Gary and Parsons. And then they'll probably just trade Crawford to the Cowboys in 3 years or so, and then just continue the trend.
Well, as long as they get a 4th-round pick for him, that's pretty good value, I will say. With that, the Steelers are now on the clock. And, I'm going to take one of my personal favorite players in this draft class, Kyle Lewis, the linebacker from Pitt, keeping him in state, which, obviously doesn't really matter that much because a lot of these guys are not from Pittsburgh. They just went there for college. But with that, he gets to stay in the same city even that he was playing college football. And I personally believe he is one of my favorite linebackers in this class, but he's just uber versatile, and I think he fits exactly what the Steelers like with that kind of, safety linebacker hybrid kind of guy who can kind of do it all, play, from, sideline to sideline. So that's why we went with Kyle Lewis there, and the Chargers are now on the clock. And you're muted, brother.
I muted myself because I am dealing with something. I've been coughing a lot. I'm sorry. And I told myself, I'm like, this won't happen again. It is in the front of my mind. It won't happen again. And then I just hear Chargers on the clock. I'm like, oh, well.
I think
Oh
we
my
should have a
gosh.
running ticker at the bottom for every podcast now. How many times does someone speak while muted? Because I know I do that too.
I honestly think before today, it would be in the single digits. But today
Yeah.
alone, I might be in 5 or 6. But
I think you're doing it for the bit, James. I think this
Yeah.
is just a
not,
bit
but
at this
it's
point.
100% a bit now, unfortunately.
We've become the
But-
office.
Yeah, and I'm like, I can roll with the punches. I give it out and I can receive it. But with the Chargers here, they like building inside out. They have a huge need at tight end. And finally, I'm going to take one of Jace's favorite people in this draft, and it's going to be Oscar Delp, tight end from Georgia. He has rare 4.5 speed with a 6.5 frame. He is, I would say, slightly lacking in the run game, and Harbaugh loves to run. However, I don't think he's as good of a blocker. I know Jason. Well,
I'm
Jason,
kidding.
you know more about blocking than I do, but I don't. What I see with my eyes, he, like I said, I'm not
You
saying
don't
he's
see
terrible.
with your ears, James? Are you sure?
Like I said, I'm like, I don't think he's great run block. I don't think he's, or I should say, I don't think he's terrible run blocking, but I just don't think that's his strength. I think when he's at his best, kind of like Hunter, I think it's when he has the ball in his hands. I think he has real good run after the catch ability, especially with oh my God, I'm spacing on the slot corners or the slot receiver's name there.
McConkey?
McConkey. Thank you.
Hold on, time out. I just want to be clarified here. He's not a slot receiver, okay? He's just white, all right? Anyway,
He's sneaky good, but
sneaky athlete, man.
with his run after the catch, I feel like this kind of feeds right into what they like to do with Herbert. And with us already, well, with me already drafting some of the other needs, I feel like Delp is the perfect pick for this spot.
Yeah, and I definitely agree there. Getting, Herbert, a legit tight end who can run after the catch, who has pretty, consistent hands, I think is going to make a big difference for them. And with that, the Dolphins are now on the clock, and we're going to stay on the offensive side of the ball. We're going to take wide receiver Ted Hurst from Georgia State. Obviously, we already took Denzel Boston earlier in the first round here, but we need receiver bad after getting rid of Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle in the same offseason. We just don't have enough weapons right now for Malik Willis. So I think adding a guy like Ted Hurst to this receiver room makes a ton of sense. Him and Denzel Boston will fit pretty well alongside each other. And I mean, think about it. Malik Willis now has 2 pretty solid receivers who are both rookies that are going to be able to grow with him. And, we'll kind of see how that goes. But that's why I took him there. Jacksonville is now on the clock.
I didn't mute myself this time at all, so I'm good. Jacksonville, after losing Travis Etienne in free agency, we're going to go with Mike Washington Jr., running back from Arkansas. He's got 4.3 speed, but he's also still somewhat a power back. He's kind of got really the best of both worlds. And with him falling to us here, actually, Stick to the Model has us as a +6 in terms of the position. I feel like it's skill meets need, or talent meets need, whatever you want to call it. Match made in heaven here for this pick. And this is the first pick, for what it's worth, that would have been one of the 2 third-round picks that the Lions gave Jacksonville for the Tesla trade.
Yeah, and I do like Mike Washington here. Like you mentioned, they got rid of Etienne, so that makes a lot of sense there. Now the Bears are on the clock. Oh, excuse me. Okay, we're good. Thought I had to sneeze there for a second. Bears are now on the clock, and we went, Caden McDonald, Brandon Cisse, and then we also got Malachi Lawrence here, and we're gonna go with another one of my favorite players in this draft class. Skylar Bell, the wide receiver out of UConn. I think he is one of the most underrated players in this draft class, period. Uber productive over there at UConn, and he is uber athletic as well, testing out of, testing a lot better than I think a lot of people saw happening. So I really like this fit. I think he fits perfectly with what Ben Johnson is going to want after getting rid of DJ Moore. He is a deep threat who can also, win, just as a route runner, and has pretty good hands. So once again, the Bears make a really good pick, and I hate it as a Lions fan. The Miami Dolphins are now on the clock, and that is me yet again. And I just went wide receiver, and now I'm going to go on the defensive side of the ball, and I'm going to take another one of my, not one of my favorite players, but a guy I really like that I think is underrated, Joshua Josephs, the edge from Tennessee. Keep this one short. Miami has a ton of needs, and I think Josh Josephs is one of the better players left on the board, period. So we just go ahead and get a pass rusher with some pretty good upside. And then the Bills are now on the clock.
The Bills are glad they finally get to pick, because other than Mesidor in the round 1, they have not picked in round 2. So at 91, we're going to go receiver, since we went D-end, obviously, with the first round pick. And I'm going to go Antonio Williams from Clemson. I feel like he, once again, kind of a theme with the people I pick, his good run after the catch ability. And with Buffalo, I know they added DJ Moore, but they still lost out on Diggs, and they're kind of different styles. So I feel like they can kind of complement each other, both going to Buffalo and giving Josh Allen another weapon in that offense.
Yeah, and I think Antonio Williams is, I'm not going to say a steal necessarily here, but it's very, very good value. A guy that a lot of people think probably goes a little bit earlier than this. So good fit as well in Buffalo. And then Dallas is now on the clock.
All right, Dallas. Let's see here. 1 second. With Dallas, we will go corner. Let's go Malik Muhammad from Texas. He's got pretty good speed. He also has some versatility. He can play it on nickel corner or outside. I think he can even play a little bit of safety as well if need be. And that versatility, excuse me, is exactly what Dallas is kind of looking for with these mid-round picks here.
Yeah, and like you said, definitely a need for them after losing, Trayvon Diggs and everything. And I like Malik Muhammad. I think he's a pretty good player. I think he's another underrated guy, in my opinion. With that, the Rams are on the clock, and maybe I'm crazy, but I'm taking another quarterback here in the third round. I am going to go with Drew Aller, the quarterback from Penn State. Now, the reason that I make this pick, I think he has super, super high upside, but a pretty low floor as well. So, I think he could be awesome, but I think he also could suck. So we'll see how that goes. But I think putting him behind Matt Stafford for a year with Sean McVay's system, we just added another receiver to that room with another offensive lineman as well. We're kind of set up for a new quarterback to take over pretty well. And I think Aller, is a match made in heaven for both the Rams and himself in terms of, like I said, going to that scheme and sitting behind Stafford for a year. So best case scenario, I think, for both sides of that. And then the Dolphins are back on the clock, and man, they have so many picks. With their sixth pick in the top 100, we are going to go with LT Overton. We're going to go edge again, and we're going to go with LT Overton from Alabama. Am I missing something, or is he just super far down? Oh,
he's under
in the
DT.
interior.
Yeah, he's a DT5. Yeah.
Okay. So that makes more sense. I'm like, there's no way he's ranked that low. But LT Overton, I think, is a guy who is a little underrated again. I think he's a guy with some versatility along the defensive line, and the Dolphins just need help all over the place. So we get a guy who can play some of that, open end, closed end, interior D line as well in the back end of the third round. And with that, the Patriots are now on the clock.
The Patriots here, I have taking Romello Heights from Texas Tech, the edge. He is a little undersized. He's only 6'3", 240. So I wouldn't be completely shocked if they try to move him to maybe like outside backer. But despite his size, kind of like Pons in a way, he is just uber successful. He had 9 sacks and over 10 TFLs last year. I'm not a big Pro Football Focus guy. However, to defend my pick, he is a 92.6 PFF grade last year, which is the third best among all edges in this draft. So if you are a big PFF guy, here you go. In addition to that, one thing I thought that was very unique about him, especially being a quote-unquote edge, is in a game they have these mile per hour like trackers in their pads and whatnot. I'm sure we've talked about it all the time with J-Mo and Gibbs. But as an edge, he was clocked at 21.8 miles per hour last year in game. So not during the 40 and shorts and all that, but in game speed. So to be honest, I don't know how often that's ever going to come in use in an NFL game, but it's still nice to have, as well as, like I said, 10 plus TFLs, 9 sacks. He just gets the job done. So this late, I'm willing to take a roll of the dice on his size and just follow the production.
And I think that kind of fits exactly what the Patriots do, on the edge right now with their defense. Harold Landry is another guy very similar. One thing I did want to say about PFF is I think that's kind of what everybody does, man. I don't love PFF, but when it goes towards my argument, I love to use it. It's something I don't know why, but I do it all the time. It's like, oh, I love this player. You look at his PFF grade sucks, and just pretend it didn't happen. Pretend you didn't see that. And then when they have a good grade, you're like, dude, see, he's got an 86.8 run grade. What do you mean?
One
he's
of those.
awesome.
You're right, and it's one of those things where, like, 9 times out of 10, I'm just not a fan of theirs. But when you have someone going in the third round, I mean, we're almost at the end of the third round, and PFF has them as the third best edge, which is obviously a critical position, and you're getting this guy at 95. I mean, like I said, and it's a little bit of, as you meant, like flavor. I'm not a big fan of it. I know some people, especially at work, that praise it and like live and die by PFF.
They probably don't watch film, just saying.
Yep. I guarantee you they don't. But like if that's your thing, like I just like to put the information, whoever out there listening, you can do with that information what you will, but that's the information.
For sure. And I definitely feel the same way on that. With that, Seattle is on the clock.
I'm still here. I haven't left. I know I wasn't on here for 12 picks or so. I just like to give a note to take that last bit and clip it and then have it be the next stick to the model commercial because, since they're kind of competitors, put that in there. But no, so Seattle was really like in the beginning of the 90s here. Once we hit the 90s, they were going, hey, we got a lot of edge options. Then they kind of ran out. They're still going to go with an edge. It may be considered a little bit of a reach with some of the guys that just went off the board, but they're going to go Anthony Lucas out of USC. I think the athletic traits and build will appeal to them, and I think they'll say, hey, we can put them in our system and be able to use them. They obviously lost Boyd Mafe. and they're kind of filling that for a team that doesn't have a lot of holes. They had a few obvious ones with people leaving in free agency and in the off season here. So that was their kind of next need at a position that's had a bit of a run after being behind.
Yeah, and like you said, it sucks that the edge position did have such a run here, so you had to sort of, I wouldn't say settle, but kind of like pick a guy that you might not necessarily wanted when you were sitting here looking at the board at 85. However, obviously fills a need, and Seattle, for being a Super Bowl team, you mentioned before, they have a lot of needs, which is kind of an odd situation to be in. But with that, the Vikings are now on the clock.
Yeah, the Vikings desperately need a center here, and I think it might be. I know Sticks in the Model. I don't think has him as a reach here, slightly. I'm gonna go with Trey Zune the third from Texas A&M. I think he is the best of what's available. I think he has a good size, but I do think his athleticism could leave something to be desired. I don't think he's going to be very good at pulling and doing anything. I don't quite want to say fancy, but kind of being that lineman on the move, even though normally that's your guard anyways. Um, but with the, I would say, desperate need they have at center, I don't think they can look any other way with the way the earlier rounds went.
Yeah, and I agree there. I will say Sam Hecht is still sitting there. He is my center too. So the fact that we've had two centers go before him is kind of surprising, but I do understand taking the players that you like a little bit more. With that, the Eagles are now on the clock.
So again, we've kind of covered this a little bit with the needs thing, but one need that could be kind of a sneaky need is we don't know what's going to happen with AJ Brown. He hasn't been traded up until this point in the draft, so it looks like he may not go. The GM's being a little stubborn about that. He's making him play in Philadelphia here and all that, but. I think there's a pretty talented receiver on the board, Bryce Lance from North Dakota State. Good guy on the outside there. They have some odd pieces as far as receivers go once you get beyond the obvious top two. And so I think adding Lance in there kind of solidifies a position that could be a need if they do end up pulling the trigger on a trade for A.J. Brown.
Yeah, and honestly, the two North Dakota State guys that everybody talks about in this draft, I think, are two of the most underrated players in this draft, period. Honestly, I think if you changed their helmet logo to a red O, they would probably be picked 2 rounds earlier than they're going to be picked in this mock. So I really like Bryce Lance. I hate that he went to Philadelphia, though, for a few reasons. Number one is I hate the Eagles because I'm a Lions fan. And number two is I don't think he's going to get used the way that I would love to see Bryce Lance used. So I do love the pick in terms of, value and everything, but I hate it for those reasons. But with that, the Steelers are now on the clock. And we are going to go trenches yet again, and we're going to go with a big run-stuffing defensive tackle in Darrell Jackson Jr. from Florida State. Obviously, a mammoth, a gigantic man, I guess is a better way to put it. And he, fits really well in this interior D-line as a plug-and-play. Maybe not a starter, but he'll be a very good rotational guy for us along that interior D-line. And then to wrap up the third round and today's show, the Jacksonville Jaguars are now on the clock.
And with the final pick from the Isaac Tesla trade that they got from the Lions, so just want to keep pointing that out there. I have the Jacksonville Jaguars selecting Devin Moore, the corner from Florida. I like his size. He's 6'3" for an outside corner, and he is very good at both man and zone. So I kind of, once again, I know I already had them draft a safety, but with them trying to limit Hunter's dual threatness, I feel like if you add up another safety, add up another corner, you kind of free him up to do a little bit more on offense. And I just think he's too good of an offensive weapon to just keep on defense. So I figured if we can get him some more help on defense, we can also improve our offense by sliding Hunter over there more snap-wise.
Yeah, and I like the versatility you're giving yourself on both sides of the ball there as well. With that, that will wrap up the show today. Once again, thank you both for joining us with a bit longer show than what we're used to. Usually about an hour 15 is our max. We're at 2 hours and 12 minutes right now, but that's how it goes when you're going 2 rounds the way that we did. Stay tuned. We have a lot of things coming up this week and next week, still as the draft comes a little bit closer. Check out Fanatics for all your sports apparel and stick to the model for your mock drafts and your Be a GM simulations and everything like that. Links are in the description. Before we head out of here, Ryan, let everybody know where to find you.
Yeah, be sure to tune into that show from last night because Jace was on it. Shane Graham's Extra Points. It'll be up on podcast shortly, but Jace was one of the primary interviews there. But if you want your football coverage, that's a good place to get it. We try to go a little bit more broad with it with Shane being on the show, but a lot of kicker related stuff if that's up your alley. And then Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh, 7 to 9 on Mondays. And we also have that on podcast as well. So check us out.
And once again, thank you for joining us as always, Ryan. We will be back next week for the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th rounds. And then we'll be back on Thursday for our live draft special like we always do. With that, stay tuned as we are going to be at the Michigan Spring Game tomorrow. So we will have a lot of updates on X and things like that. And with that, you can find me at JSoSweet, James at Gullet_James, Ryan at... I'm blanking on your user.
Sports Intel Ryan on X.
Perfect. Sports Intel Ryan, and me and James at MIFB Network and MichiganFootballNetwork.com. Once again, we appreciate you guys for watching, and we will see you on the next one.